Chapter 2. To and From Market. Days. Bond led his partner 00 and Darling into his Lotus Esprit, and they traveled from the school that they were using for a set and arrived at the celebration on Main Street known as Market Days. Scrambling to find a parking spot, the car finally pulled up to the spot right near the entrance. Exiting the car and entering the festival, crowds immediately swarmed the trio. "I never knew such a small town to party like this. How come you didn't tell me about this before, Daniel?" "Well, it is just the summer, James, and, James?" Bond had turned his head and started to chat with some woman at one of the booths. Vaguely, 00 could hear Bond say his name in his fashion. "Really? Can you blame him? It's James, after all," Darling said in relief. "I suppose not. Why don't you and I take a look around? Shall we, Ms. Darling?" "Indeed, Mr. Saletti." Darling and 00 roamed the street looking at all the different types of booths and picking up little trinkets along the way. 00 then stopped in front of one of the movie theaters called Red River Theater. "Darling, have you ever seen that?" 00 pointed to a poster for the movie La La Land. "I've heard of it, but I was never quite sure what it was about." "It's about two lovers who grow together, then grow apart. A Casablanca story, as I like to say." Would it remind you of Melissa? Taylor, even?" "Even though she claims to belong with James, I could see myself and Melissa in that. But Taylor? No. I feel like that was more of a slight fling going on. However, what do you think? Would you like to see it?" "It sounds like fun, Mr. Saletti." Suddenly, two men then came behind them and pulled guns on them. "Mr. Saletti, Ms. Darling, you will come with us. I'm guessing you're not part of the entertainment here? Come quietly, you two." The two men moved their guns in the opposite direction, motioning that they wanted 00 and Darling to come with them. 00 stepped one foot in their direction and then grabbed Darling's hand and started to run away. The men ran in pursuit. They came to a fork in the road and searched for their targets. In the distance, they saw 00 and Darling, who, noticing the men, got on the move again. Going in between all the different vendors and dodging the occasional bullet, 00 and Darling ran for their lives. They soon ducked out of sight of the two men and had gotten away for a moment. The men turned around and around until they came face to face with James Bond. "It's Bond," they said. Bond smirked while tilting his head and then opened his blazer to reveal his Walther PPK. He then raised an eyebrow and the two men ran in the opposite direction. Bond chased after them, keeping hot on their trail. They soon made their way to the kids' area and burst through the surrounding fence. Bond started to climb up one of the inflatable slides, and then the two men suddenly stopped at the top. They looked down, and then behind them, Bond was not in sight. Thinking they had lost him, they made their way to the slide's ladder. Right then, Bond came from behind them and put his arms around their necks tightly. "All right, who are you working for?" "We're just sent to invite you," one of the men struggled to say. "Where?" "The Guam Resort. Here's the note." The other man reached as well as he could into a blazer he was wearing. He grabbed a piece of paper that was presumably the note and shakingly reached it up to Bond. He coughed slightly. Bond then released his grip on the men and read the note. "So, your boss is wanting to start a hotel in Guam and wants myself and 00 to go over and be his first guests. Why all the weapons?" "Because," one of the men said. That's not a very good reason. Perhaps if I gave you time to think about it, you'd come up with a better answer. That way, we could let the whole thing slide." Bond then moved his hands behind the two men and pushed them down the slide to the bottom. As they tried to scramble out of the deflating bottom, 00 was waiting for them, Walther in hand, with Darling behind him. "Now, vacations are always interesting to me, so why don't you tell me why your boss wants us there?" The two men cowered in fear from the slightly grim yet comical treatment they just went through. "Scaramanga. He wants you because of Scaramanga." 00 looked up at Bond, who had slid down and was now listening closely. He raised an eyebrow again in interest. "Who is Scaramanga?" Darling asked. "I've only heard stories, but I have a feeling that James knows a little bit more." "So does this mean we're not seeing the movie?" "Well, yes, I'm afraid so. To rework a saying, we are going to and from Market Days."